Good evening and welcome to Monday Night Meetup. I'm your host, Commonwealth Victim Advocate, Suzanne Estrella. You have entered a space for honest conversation and thoughtful reflection. I do need to let you know that there's no expectation of privacy. This is going out live on our Facebook and being recorded so that we can post it to our YouTube channel at a later date. You can expect to be respected. We want you to join the conversation. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to type those into the chat box and we will address those throughout the evening. Tonight, we are honoring October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Our friends at the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence have released a really great video about Domestic Violence Awareness Month and what you can expect and some of the events that they are planning and how we can participate as community members, what we can do to get involved to help stop domestic violence. But tonight, I'm really excited about the panel that we have gathered here for this conversation. We're going to be talking about a particular type of domestic violence survivor, as well as some of the general components that affect all survivors of domestic violence. So I'm glad that you're here joining us tonight. And like I said, we want you to be a part of the conversation. So please feel free to type questions or comments into the chat box. I'm going to start by letting my panel guests introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the work that they do. And then we'll dive into some questions. Let's start with the representative from a local domestic violence center. Lisa, tell us about what you do and the name of your center and the county where those services are provided. Unmute yourself and tell us about that.
Thank you, Suzanne. My name is Lisa Buzas. I am a shelter coordinator for the Center for Victims in Allegheny County. I currently work at our domestic violence shelter as a shelter coordinator, case manager, legal advocate, and child advocate. Previously, I have worked in the courtroom with children that were either sexually abused or physically abused by an adult offender. I've been with the Center for Victims for 22 years, and I dedicate everything that I do for what I do for my clients. I have currently been back at the shelter since 2012, working directly with clients to self-empower and find a new future for themselves.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for all that you've been doing and there's so many years of service. I'm excited to hear all that you have to add to the conversation tonight. Okay, Brandy, you are next up on my screen. Tell us about who you are and the work that you do.
My name is Brandy Baugher. I'm a detective with the York County District Attorney's Office. I'm assigned to the SCU, which is the Special Crimes Unit. Within my employment, I have been with the DA's office for 2 years, but I have been working in the criminal justice system for over 25 years. In the unit that as a detective, I assist with some investigations as well as the attorneys. Anything the attorneys need, I'm there. My unit specializes in the child abuse, sexual assaults, physical abuse to children, domestic violence, also elder abuse. Not quite like what you see on TV. We don't solve anything in an hour, but it is very interesting and I work with a lot of great people.
Great. So glad that you're here tonight. Thank you for the work that you do. And Keairra is with Survive and Tell. Tell us about who you are and tell us about Survive and Tell.
Absolutely. Thank you, Suzanne and Ashley, for giving us this platform to come share some of our truths. I am Keairra, one of the founders of Survive and Tell. It's an organization that works to support all domestic violence victims with the focal point on officer-involved domestic violence. We've been doing this work for close to 5 years now. The frameworks and things that we try to focus on and set as goals are establishing meaningful and trusting relationships with law enforcement agencies, facilitating OIDV trainings for local domestic violence agencies, as well as virtual trainings. We also create media awareness that brings attention to officer-involved domestic violence and what exactly it is. Some other things that we've been working on or have in the works is organizing community outreach initiatives, building relationships with other local and national organizations, and overall just supporting any victim however we can overall. So I feel honored to be here amongst you guys, and I'm really interested in to learn about the other organizations that are here to share tonight. Thank you, Suzanne.
Great, great. So as one of our panelists mentioned, I think it was Brandy, that these situations do not play out like we see on television. And I think as just a community in general, sometimes a lot of our perceptions or ideas can be fostered by what we see on television. Like for me personally, I like Lifetime, but those movies are so not accurate as to like a real life scenario, but they do kind of bring a lot of awareness to domestic violence. But sometimes, like I said, it can be misleading and discouraging because it just kind of misses the truth or the heart of what a person is actually going through. So like I said, tonight we wanted to talk about a particular type of domestic violence survivor, and that is a survivor that abuser is a law enforcement officer. And some of the challenges that those people face that I think just in common practice as members of the community, we would not really even consider, like, how does that person go about calling for help when the person who is hurting them is the person who is also supposed to be involved in providing help. Keairra, I'm going to start with you. And I want you to tell us a little bit about, since you all focus with that group, tell us about what is that like? What are you hearing that those survivors are facing?
Speaking with different officer-involved domestic violence victims, I feel like the resounding thing is that they don't feel like their voices are heard, or they're not working with people who really understand their unique circumstances in relationship with law enforcement. So that's where Survive and Tell steps in. We're an organization that's founded on the notion that all domestic violence victims deserve support, no matter what walk of life they come from or what they're going through. They deserve assistance, to be connected to resources, and have someone advocate on their behalf. I mean, I know with all the different roles we work within, each of them equally important. I feel like we all can agree how that awareness is very important. Like, because how do you stop something that you don't know is happening? But surprisingly, just a few years ago, there wasn't really a lot of research out there about officer-involved domestic violence. In fact, many people don't realize it exists. And domestic violence actually has in the law enforcement community actually is higher than in the general population. And a lot of people don't know that. And they're identified as being, police officers are identified as being some of the most heinous abusers, for three reasons. One, they own a gun. Statistically, the presence of a gun in the house increases or escalates the likelihood of a homicide by 500%. 500%.
Wow.
And right. And we know our police officers typically take their service weapons home with them. They may have additional weapons in the home. So that statistic alone just really, really paints or illustrates the importance of confronting officer-involved domestic violence. Secondly, they know the law. They know how to manipulate the law. That becomes a problem when we have victims who have children to police officers because of their relationship, and the police officers, abusers, want to control the situation. They sometimes attempt to get custody of the kids, but they have an unfair advantage. They know the prosecutors. They know the judges that may preside over their custody hearing. They know the custody attorneys. And a lot of times the victims actually lose custody of their children. And if you're a mother and you have children, you know how devastating that can be for anyone. So again, it puts them just in a precarious situation. You have law enforcement officers who file false charges against the victims. Now, we know that's an issue in the domestic violence community in general. So just imagine how it's heightened when you have the police officer and his relationship with his coworkers and his supervisors. So a lot of times our victims leave with false charges and convictions, which farther difficult their journey to healing.
Mhm.
And then lastly, they work hand in hand a lot of times with our domestic violence agencies. They know the locations, they know the people. So how, if you have a victim who's in that situation, how can they feel comfortable leaving their home for safety and going to a shelter where they know that their abuser could very easily find them and locate them? It just becomes a dangerous situation for them overall. So our goal at Survive and Tell pretty much is to bridge that relationship between law enforcement communities, domestic violence agencies, as well as domestic violence survivors and victims in this whole. And we do that by 3 ways. One, we investigate OIDV. We talk about what it is. We're in the process of connecting mental health, PTSD, workforce trauma, and how that may contribute to OIDV incidents.
Mhm.
You already know, like in the last few years, police officers, maybe deservingly or undeservingly, have pretty much had like a pretty negative perception in the media due to them overstepping or abusing their power, their authority in line of work. But I really don't think there's a lot of focus on what those police officers are doing once they go home. And you kind of think, right, if they're abusing their authority in the line of work, then they're probably going home and exerting that same power and control over their families, over their significant others, their wives and children. In fact, there's a statistic that says 75 or 70%, 73, percent of police officers who abuse their wives, and this only looks at male police officers, but 73% of male abusers have admitted to also abusing citizens in the line of work. So there's definitely some type of correlation there that needs to be looked at. We also want to look at police trainings. We want to see that if these police trainers are actually, and I don't want to say it's a cause and effect, but again, correlation, police personality in a lot of ways mimics what we know are characteristics exhibited by abusers. And I think that's something that's interesting and needs to be discussed more too. So we also build relationships with domestic violence agencies. We advocate on the behalf. We talk to them about what OIDV is, how the circumstances are unique, why the victim may sometimes appear to be overly paranoid, because we get that a lot too from OIDV victims, is that the domestic violence advocates just didn't really understand why they weren't trusting of any law enforcement, not just their abusers. In fact, just mentioning a police officer to an OIDV victim may sour their taste and destroy the trust that you've already worked up or built with them. So you just have to be really, really careful, because what might seem overly paranoid to an advocate, if you put yourself in the shoe where they've called the police on their abuser and watch the police defend their abuser, or not appropriately or properly investigated, not make any record of it, or even gaslight the victim. I've heard of so many different horror stories about that.
Yeah, you mentioned the power and control, and I know that's something that we hear talked about whenever you talk about domestic violence, that power and control is such a big component. Lisa, with your years of experience, have you seen these power and control dynamics kind of escalated in this type of situation? Have you worked with survivors who were involved with where the officer was an offender?
I have not. I have not worked with a direct survivor of a police officer.
Mhm.
But one of the, at our shelter, one of the standards that we have, because we're not sure if the victim will disclose that her abuser is a police officer. So, but one of the actions we have in place is if a police officer would come to the door and ask for a particular client, we will not disclose that that client is there for that client's safety because of that dynamic. We do understand that there is no protection in what race, what class, what job you do in as a survivor of domestic violence. So we know that DAs, police officers, judges, all of them could have a survivor of domestic violence. And to protect that survivor, if a police officer would show up with, say, a warrant or a summons for that client saying that they know they live there, we cannot disclose that they are there. Now, as a legal advocate myself, if that client is there, I will approach that client and state to them, if this is a warrant that is true or a summons that is true, it is in your best interest to turn yourself in and and to clear that warrant. But we do get description and names of abusers, but we don't know their exact line of duty. And if that person is going to be paranoid and scared to give us that information, we are still protecting them in that sense. So we're not stopping law enforcement from doing their job by any means by coming to our door, because I will approach that client directly, but we're also protecting the survivor's identity and security of being in our shelter.
Right. That's super important for survivors to know that that layer of protection is there for them.
Yes.
Brandy, how about in your work? How do you see these power and control dynamics playing out, and how do you see that come into play maybe in some of your investigative work?
I haven't myself seen domestic violence involving officers for numerous years when I used to do patrol, and that was actually law enforcement on law enforcement in that residence that was reoccurring. I've had a recent investigation with my department. We investigate mostly conflicts of interest or multi-jurisdictional. We're not going to be your first responders.
Right.
So we would be the ones that would be called if it is a conflict of interest. Each department should have some type of policy or procedure where an OIC or sergeant or someone in charge is notified immediately if a police officer within their department is involved in a situation. And when I say that, that's anything, car accident, domestic, anything. And then that supervisor needs to make the decision if another agency should investigate. As far as an investigation, it would be treated the same as any other person involved in a domestic situation. There's no special, nothing's granted to that person. For my department, that's specifically why we would be called there, just due to conflict of interest, so that that person's coworkers do not have to be the ones investigating. So that we can make sure that the person, it's a victim-centered interview where it's focused on them and believing them and not automatically thinking their coworker didn't do anything wrong. So that's where jurisdiction and who's going to be involved takes a big part.
That's good to know. So, and do you feel like that's happening? I know you can't speak to every law enforcement agency, but is that a common practice that it would be investigated by another organization, not the same organization where that officer works? Is that common?
Yes, within York County, I can definitely say it is. And we've seen one or two where they tried to handle it in-house and may have notified us. And these weren't domestic situations, they were other situations. But as soon as we were made aware of it, we became the investigating department. And just because we investigate something doesn't mean that it warrants charges all the time. It's just so that you know that you have a legit, correct investigation completed. But I just recently, I had one that involved law enforcement, and that department immediately called our office to handle the investigation. Okay. So it's something, especially something very serious, it's going to be turned over to a different jurisdiction, whether it be the district attorney's office, Pennsylvania State Police, possibly the Attorney General, which would most likely just give it back to the district attorney's office. But it should be within each department in their policies or procedures that they can contact another department. Now, if they have a domestic situation where it's a law enforcement officer that doesn't work for them and isn't someone close that they work with on a regular basis, they're fine to investigate that. I mean, that I've done before. That would be just like any other investigation with any other survivor or any other perpetrator being involved.
Okay, so let me ask this, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give your recommendation. Let's do like a hypothetical. Let's just assume that there's a woman whose husband works for the local police department where they live, and she's decided that hey, this is it. He's been abusive. I can't take this anymore. What would your advice be? How should she get help? Like if she calls 911, then that call is going to go to the station where he works. Should she still do that, or is there someplace else that she should call then? But what advice would you give?
I'm going to say that's up to each individual, as you explain in this circumstance, woman. If it is an emergency, yes, by all means, go through 911. That's going to be your quickest response for your safety, for your health. If you have any medical needs that need attention immediately, you want to go through 911. If this is something where he's not currently home, you're welcome to call his supervisor if you feel that the lieutenant or the chief, and explain the situation. That would, of course, not be an active domestic, because on an active domestic, you're going to get your local department. If you're not receiving the assistance from them, and what that lieutenant or chief or whoever the officer in charge would be most likely in my county would be to call my department to do the investigation. And at that time, it's most likely not going to be a first responder type of call at this point if we're involved, because as I said, the emergency part is what needs taken care of first. We would come in for the actual investigation, interviewing everyone involved, photographs, evidence, statements, everything like that.
Okay.
So if you are in that type of situation and you feel like you've already reached out for some type of help and they haven't brought in another department, then by all means, call your local district attorney's office and they should be able to help you. And once you explain the situation to an investigator, they're going to most likely immediately become involved.
Okay. So, Keairra, how about you? What suggestions would you provide?
I would agree with Brandy. If it's an active domestic violence incident, like you definitely want to call 911 or your local police department, because safety is priority. But in my experience with working with OIDV victims, sometimes you have to go a step farther, and it may not be enough to reach out to your local prosecutor, because like we said, we never really know what the relationship is with that police officer and that district attorney. They may have worked with each other in a professional capacity in many different ways, and you want to believe that bias isn't there. But of course, like if you built that rapport with that person, it's really hard for them to see them for who they are, who they could be, or what their wives or significant others are accusing them of. So what a lot of times we get from OIDV victims is that they felt like they could turn to no one because no one believed them. If they went to their coworker, they justified the behavior, or they pretended like it wasn't there. If they go to an attorney, a lot of the times they'll get accusatory language, like, well, what did you do? Or are you for certain it happened this way? Because it's, his side versus his side, your side, and just things that are trying to discourage the victim from moving forward. One particular instance that comes into mind is Crystal Judson in Washington and what happened with her situation. She was actually married to the police chief, And so again, like, where do you go there when this is the highest ranking officer in the department? And he has all these accolades and he's been in law enforcement for the past 25 years, very minimal misconduct on his record. How do you go and say, okay, this person is abusing me? And even though I know that he seems pleasant on the outside and he has all these relationships with judges and prosecutors and maybe even legislators, politicians, he's this powerful force. Who's going to believe me when he has all those people backing him? In all actuality, the victims are actually telling the truth. And in her situation, unfortunately, he actually committed suicide, homicide. He killed her, unfortunately, and then killed himself. So we know it's definitely a mental health capacity or a factor that we have to observe as well. But it's just, I think it's something that could be avoided and prevented if we just started to realize that what should be happening isn't always what's happening in a situation for OIDV.
Yeah, thank you for that. Lisa, how about you? Do you have any other suggestions you could offer?
Well, I apologize, Brandy and Keairra. I'm not sure how big your county is. Allegheny County is a very big county. So I completely agree with Brandy that if it is an immediate domestic violence situation, of course, call 911. If she is able to get away, the thing that I could suggest is that we bring her into our shelter and then go to the DA's office, go and speak to the head of the domestic violence unit, or talking with the DAs instead of the chief of police or the captain or higher up from the police officer. And again, I apologize. I'm not, this is not something that I do, but if I would have to advise a client in Allegheny County, that's what I would advise them to do. We would be with them every step of the way while they work on their process. So.
Yeah, and that was a question that we got from the chat. This person was asking, what if the victim report is taken from the partner's employment and not another agency? What can be done? So it sounds like you all are saying, if the person finds that out and the proper investigation isn't taking place, then their next step might be to go straight to the DA's office and try to report that even further.
And both mentioned the victim witness advocate assistance. If the female is able to leave the house and get assistance from someone, that is someone that could guide them along the way and take them where they need to go. They know from experience which agencies to deal with. I will say, like, if we do have an officer involved incident, if we know the officer, it'll go to one of our coworkers right away. Because I work with a lot of gentlemen that have had many years in law enforcement as well as myself. And if we knew or worked with the person, it'll go to one of our coworkers because of that. I can't say that for every county. I don't know the size of their departments, but within our department, that's what would happen. But definitely your victim witness advocate, your agencies, they're going to be able to be the ones to help you along the way, to find you that emergency shelter, hopefully in a place where he would not be able to locate her, as well as guide through the system and take to the proper law enforcement authorities to investigate the matter.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Lisa, I'm gonna turn to you. Tell us, what can a survivor expect if they're reaching out for services for the very first time from their local domestic violence center? What does that look like?
So Suzanne, you know that Center for Victims is a comprehensive victim service agency. So as a whole, we do work with victims of all violent crimes. So if a victim, and I'm just going to start off with this, if a victim would call our hotline, we would listen, do an assessment, and then guide them in the direction they need to go, because they may need jail notification. which we are the only agency in Allegheny County that has a direct relationship with the county jail. So if there are offenders being released from jail, we would call the client or the survivor directly and let them know. We also have therapy, legal advocacy, community education. So if we would assess them, they would need shelter. We would then assess them for shelter, bring them into our shelter. A client could come in, I apologize, the survivor could come into our shelter with just the clothes on their back and their kids, and we can get them a start from day one if they are ready for it. And every survivor is experiencing a different type of experience, leaving maybe for the first time, the 8th time, not sure. So we assess them based off of their needs in particular, and I'm the one who does that. I do case management with that. We do teach self-sufficiency and empowerment. We teach survivors that we can help them financially get stable in a new safe home for them as a single, or them and other children if they're a family. We can provide them clothing, safety, furniture, but our shelter, coming into our shelter, they know that they're going to have that support from day one. We have no judgment. Everybody that works at our agency works on helping the client support themselves and to move on without the negativity and abusive nature that they were thriving in. We work with child custody. We do not have attorneys on board, but we do refer them to agencies that do, so they can get at least custody involved. And that is very important for a survivor that has children, because even if that abuser did not want to have anything to do with the children, that is their way in to that survivor's home, new environment, and teaching them and guiding them on what their rights are as well. So we can basically help them start fresh and move on if they're willing to.
I think it's important to mention that there is a local domestic violence center serving every county in the Commonwealth. So
Yes.
similar to what you described, is going to be available no matter where you live in the Commonwealth. So, and then to find your local center, you can get that information off of PCADV's website, and that's pcadv.org. Keairra, tell us about some of the training that you currently provide or that you wish was available to officers to kind of help bridge that gap. I think sometimes it can be hard for people who maybe even view themselves as respected officials to understand like why someone would be afraid of them or why that could possibly create a danger. What type of training do you guys have available, or would you like to see officers involved in?
That's a great question, Suzanne. We actually offer specific training for law enforcement agencies. And one of those things that it teaches officers is how to identify police officer abuse. A lot of them have very close-knit relationships. They may even be friends outside of the work, and they know each other's spouses. So just the telltale signs to look for in spouses, their responses, what may be considered as erratic behavior, those type of signs, and then what to do once you notice that something is peculiar, who to report it to. Now, it shouldn't just be reported to your coworker, but it needs to go to a supervisor. You need to press this. You need to take accurate records if you actually witness something on your own, taking pictures, finding witnesses yourself. But it also goes through how to implement OIDV policy, because not every law enforcement agent, in fact, only a few law enforcement agencies have OID specific policy. Most law enforcement agencies investigate OIDV just like they would investigate any other domestic violence agency. And from experience and research, that just simply doesn't work. So what we do is teach them how to implement OIDV specific policies. That way there's an actual protocol in place if they were to actually identify OIDV amongst their ranks.
That's great. That's great. And how can a community, know about that training, or what are ways that they can get in touch with you all for that training? Is it just like through your website, or what do they do? Like if somebody hears this and says, oh man, we need that, what should we tell them?
Well, that's what we're hoping, Suzanne. Definitely. If someone would like to learn more about what we do or even sign up for a training, you guys can contact us via our website. I believe Ashley shared it in the chat. We also, but it's surviveandtell.org. You also can contact us via our telephone number or send a direct email, which is surviveandtell1@gmail.com. And I can share that in the chat as well, if that's okay. And then we also have our Facebook page, which is we're pretty active on. We respond there promptly. So if you'd rather do it through social media, Survive and Tell on Facebook is where you can find us.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about victim blaming. That's something that we hear often that hinders people from coming forward trying to get help, is because they're going to blame them. How have your organizations addressed victim blaming? Brandy, let's start with you.
In my department and with my position, I have received complaints of the officers' questions and, as you would describe, possible victim blaming. Training and experience is definitely important. Training is all I can say. And when an officer is found to be doing this on a, we all have our bad days. How do I put this? Like, if this is going on and a parent in their entire position of their employment, then they need to be reevaluated as far as being an officer in general. Especially with your domestic violence, such sex offenses, anything along those lines. As I used the word before, victim-centered interviewing, you don't talk to the victim the same way you do to a suspect. That's just not what you do. And you need to be more understanding, more empathetic, offering the services. So if there is an officer out there that is not doing that, I would definitely bring it to their supervisor's attention, maybe recommend some training. And if it's in something else, there might be more that needs to be done, especially if that's seen across the board. And that entire, as you described, an officer that abuses on the job may also abuse at home, and the statistics with that. What are we looking at when it comes to that? Should there have been more background investigation? Should there be some type of counseling offered for the officer? You have to look at the entire circumstances, but it definitely needs to be approached and taken care of, as far as not just by the wayside and ignore if an officer is behaving that way towards anybody, much less a victim or a survivor.
All right, thank you. Lisa, how about you? How do you all address victim blaming?
So, of course, what Brandy said, training. We do training in our local law enforcement agencies. We also do training at our DA's office. We have community education trainings that anybody can ask for. Our website is centerforvictims.org. We also have a very unique training experience at our main office in the South Side. It's called the Healing Rivers Project. It's actually a walkthrough experience on what a victim of any type of trauma would experience. So it's a very unique training that we offer. But what Brandy said, it's just training your local law enforcement and your local DA's office, and just having people understand, don't question, don't blame. It could be 20 times that a victim may call. There's no set time frame that you should give a person of any type of trauma that they're experiencing. So that is what our agency offers.
Keairra?
My answer would differ depending on who is the person doing victim blaming. A lot of the times I've encountered victims who blame themselves. And in that case, I come from more of an understanding approach, because I understand, dealing with domestic violence, and sometimes they do have lower self-esteem, or sometimes their abusers can project things onto them that they start to believe about themselves. And so you do have victims who come to you and say, oh, if I wouldn't have done this, he wouldn't responded this way, or I provoked this woman in this way. And so first, it's just letting them know that it's not their fault. Like, you cannot provoke anyone into abusing you physically, emotionally, and just helping them to place that blame, where it belongs. And then supporting them, just constantly reiterating their self-worth, their importance, and just educating about what domestic violence is, red flags they may not have known beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's someone else, on the other hand, who's not a victim or a survivor of domestic violence, I confront it. Like, I call it straight out, like, no, this is not okay. This not that person. We have to confront that fallacy that there's something that victims can do to stop themselves from being abused. It's simply not true. It's just so many institutions and so many systemic things that contribute to domestic violence. It's unrealistic for us to believe that this one person can change the entire dynamic of their relationship. And so I just let them know, and then I educate them. I tell them, the different reasons why people choose to stay in their abusive relationships, and, just tell them it's not our job to judge, and also just to keep in mind that just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it's not happening.
Yeah, that's a good point. That brings me to my next question.
I'm sorry, Suzanne. I just want to say, Keairra, I applaud you for answering that question in that way, because that is amazing. There are so many clients that I see on a daily basis that blame themselves for the situation they're in, and they blame themselves for what they're going through. And it's just about showing them that self-worth, and to know that you are worth it, and this is not your fault. I applaud you. I didn't even read that question in that way, and I'm actually upset at myself for that. Thank you, Keairra.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, listen, you got space with this next one. This one I'm going to ask you each, because like I said, sometimes the studies, which, the studies are great, but sometimes the studies can kind of give people like the wrong impression, and then almost kind of make people lump every survivor into this like one place. And that's just not true either. But the studies that say that often a survivor will leave multiple times and return before they leave for good. So I'm sure that you all, because you've been in this work for so long, have heard those studies. I want to ask you, what words of encouragement would you give to a survivor tonight who maybe has clicked on to this conversation, and they find themselves in that cycle? We know that the reasons could be, there's so many. But what words of encouragement would you give to a survivor who's maybe just really having a hard time and maybe has started to blame themselves? What words of encouragement would you give to a survivor?
That you're not alone, that you are absolutely not alone. And that if you pick up that phone and call us, even if you're not ready to leave at that moment, you can still call us and we will be there for you. We will support you. Your future is yours. It's not how that person has made it. It may be difficult to start, but we're here to help you every step of the way.
I would say utilize the help that's out there. Call your support, trust them. They're going to be there for you, whatever agency it may be, and follow you along the way. Keep in contact with them because it might not be easy for them to always contact you. So make sure you keep in contact as well with that support, and just trust them and let them help you any way they can. You're not always going to agree with what they say, and they might not agree. It might not be 100% that you both agree on everything. It's your decision. It's your story. But they're just there to help guide you and help you along the way.
And I wholeheartedly second what Lisa said. I just feel like it's important that we do emphasize to them that they aren't alone in this fight, that there are people that they can reach out to support them and connect them with whatever resource that they may need to leave their situation. Definitely prioritize your safety. You know, even if you are in a position where you can leave right now, make sure you have a safety plan developed so that if something does happen, you can ensure your safety or try to ensure your safety. So pretty much what I do at a point where I'm with someone, I don't want to definitely victim blame. I don't want to judge them because everyone's situation is differently. I just want to provide them with as many resources as possible and support so that they know that there's somebody that they can reach out to that believes everything they say and wants to help them in any way possible.
Okay. This question is similar, but I want you to think about it from a different perspective, because I believe that collaboration is key to creating safer, caring communities where justice thrives. But sometimes individuals who are not victim service providers or victim advocates, I live next door or across the street, or my kids go to the same school as them, really are at a loss for what to do. What advice do you have for just the neighbor who maybe has some suspicions, or the school guidance counselor, people like that? What advice do you have on what it would look like to be a good neighbor to someone who is in a domestic violence situation?
If you see something, say something, especially if you're in an apartment and you hear an active domestic next door. Yes, it is something that you're hearing, and you can't ignore it. That person could be in immediate danger. Call 911. If it's not something that's an emergency type situation, maybe you can help by finding resources and providing it, especially if you're close to that neighbor, and actually talk with them. Let them know that you're there to help, that you're a safe place, and provide them with some information and resources that maybe they can't find on their own.
I agree with Brandy. If you hear something and there is a domestic going on, report it. It's not the victim reporting it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I called because I heard things going on. If it's not an emergency situation, then yes, be there to listen. Be there to be that, maybe that safety plan in that person, or be that person in that person's safety plan. Be there so if that survivor needs to maybe store some money at your house, or a suitcase at your house, and be part of her safety plan or his safety plan. And just be there to listen, plant that seed for that survivor. Let them know that you are there and that you care, because there's a lot of people out there that don't feel they have anybody that cares about them. So if you're the deli worker at a grocery store and you see something going on, let that person know, hey, I'm here for you. Or if you're their neighbor, hey, if you ever need to talk, don't force it upon them. That's not what you need to do. You want to do more, but you have to just be there to listen and just, I don't know what else to say, is be there for them.
I agree with both ladies. Definitely report it. If you witness something, whether you overhear it or you see it, call the police officer, let someone know so they can investigate it. I would never encourage anyone to investigate it on their own or do anything in which they don't feel comfortable. But as Lisa mentioned, there's multiple ways you can be of assistance. And one huge thing is just not to be judgmental. If someone is divulging that information with you, they must trust you or feel like you're a caring ear. And the last thing you want to do is turn them off from sharing that experience by judging them. So I think just being that supportive, listening ear can encourage them or empower victims that are experiencing domestic violence.
Awesome. I got one final question for each of you. Tell me what the phrase "start by believing" means to you.
Well, so I have two parts in this question, because yes, I have worked in my organization for the past 22 years. And one of the biggest things that I had as an advocate or a case manager is everybody experiences their own abuse in their own way. So I've always had clients ask me, well, have you been through this? Have you gone through this? Has this ever happened to you? No, it didn't. But even if it did, Lisa would experience it different than you would. So as a victim myself, just recently, 8 years ago, start believing to me means self-worth. And I try to practice this on my clients. If you find your self-worth and you know that you can have a future, you can move forward. I know it hurts. I know it's hard. And I don't use my experiences with my clients at all, but letting them know that believe in yourself. And that's why we teach self-sufficiency and and empowerment so much at our agency. I may, as a case manager, give them guidance, but it's up to them to achieve those steps and achieve those goals. I can't do it for you. You have to be able to do it for yourself. So let's believe in every individual client or survivor is it's maybe it's in their own. Do you know what I'm saying? It's maybe teaching me something all the time, or it's teaching them something all the time. So I think start believing is we're ready. Are you ready? Because we have to at some point. But when it goes back to your last question, if they believe in themselves for a short period of time and then they can't anymore, it's okay. Call us. We're here. We're not going to go away. We're not going to turn you away because you've called so many times, or you're not sure. So that's what I feel start by believing means.
Thank you.
For me, start by believing just simply means understanding that your situation may not be their situation. And just because it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it didn't happen to that person. I think it's very natural for humans sometimes to look at situations from their own personal perspective. And if it's something that they can't experience, especially if it seems very abstract or off the wall per se, it's really hard to understand that and grasp it, or even take it as true. So I just think start believing means just removing those blockers, those biases, and just listening with a pure heart and an active listening ear.
And I'm going to say both of those answers were very good. From my position and with victims and survivors, believe what they tell you. Until there's something that tells you otherwise, believe what they tell you. some things may sound crazy and unusual, repetitive, like you said, going back and forth between the relationship, but believe what they tell you, don't dismiss what they tell you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to each of the panelists. We really appreciate you sharing this conversation with us tonight. Ashley's gonna put up the contact information should other community service providers want to get in touch and have an opportunity to take advantage of some of those trainings. We want to make sure that that's available. Again, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence has a great video out about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. If you haven't seen that, please check that out on their website. And just thank you to each of the panelists. We so appreciate the work that you do every day to make communities safer and to end domestic violence. It's so valuable to have such committed and caring workers across disciplines doing the work here in the Commonwealth, in the local communities. And we are so appreciative of the work that you do. And thank you so much. Next month, we're going to be talking about gun violence and invite you all to come back and share with us the first Monday nights of November for that conversation. Thanks so much. And we look forward to continued collaboration throughout the communities in the Commonwealth. Have a good evening.